Transformation Ground Control. Your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 51. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. Kyler, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
This is the podcast that is designed to help you reach the third stage of digital transformation success. So whether you're looking for best practices on the process, people, technology, strategy, project management, or any other aspect of digital transformation, this podcast is for you. And this is the whole focus of our podcast here. So thanks for being here today. Welcome to all the audience members here in our third episode of 2022. Got an exciting show for you today. We have a few things we're going to cover. First of all, we're going to cover at the beginning of the segment, we'll start off by talking about some hot topics and tech trends, talking a little bit about AI as it relates to COVID. We'll talk about banking in the cloud and some other things as well. So we'll sort of do a hodgepodge of trends and topics related to digital transformation here in the opening segment. Later in the show, we're going to have Professor Norbert Gronau, or Gronau. I feel like I'm mispronouncing his name. He's German, so I feel like I'm using a French pronunciation of a German name. So I'm sure I feel bad that I'm probably mispronouncing his name. But it's Professor Norbert Gronau, to the best of my pronunciation abilities. He's a professor at University of Potsdam in Germany, and he's also a consultant, and he also does a lot of research as part of his academic and consulting background. And we're going to have him on the show talking about just general digital transformation, benchmarks and research and trends, things that he's seeing and finding and learning in his research over 20 years of studying digital transformations and ERP implementations. And excited to have him on the show to talk through what he's seeing in his research, just to add some quantitative academic flavor to some of the things we talk about on the show. And then also I do want to unpack a little bit with him some of the geographical differences in what to expect in digital transformations or how digital transformations vary from region to region throughout the world. We have a global audience here that listens to this podcast. We at the Third Stage team have a global team, so it's always interesting to kind of get that global perspective of how things are different and how are they similar in different parts of the world, depending on where you are. So we're excited to have him on the show here later today. And then finally, we're going to have Michelle Weiss on the show later today, and she's going to be, she's actually a senior manager at Third Stage Consulting. She works with a lot of our Latin American clients, among others. And she's going to be on the show talking about how to select the right enterprise technology for your digital transformation. So we'll get some tips from her on some of the recent software evaluation and selection projects that she's been involved with. So stay tuned for that. We're excited to have her on the show as well. I think this is the first time that either of these guests have been on our podcast. So we're starting off the new year with a bang and some exciting new guests. But before we get to our guests, Kyler, what are some of these trends you're seeing and some of the recent topics that you wanted to chat about here in this opening segment?
Yeah, so I wanted to follow up on kind of the fintech conversation we had last week and talk a little bit about that migration for banks specifically in the banking industry to cloud technologies, whether it's they build their own, whether it's they're using Amazon or Microsoft or Google as partners in helping that cloud migration. I came across an interesting statistic that I wanted to get your reaction to because it's a little confusing to me. So Bank of America was profiled in a few of these articles, and they actually saved $2 billion a year, in part by building its own cloud. And I know we kind of talk a lot about the costs of the cloud and is it more cost effective a solution? So I wondered if I could just get your reaction to kind of that statistic of saving that amount of money. And maybe just ask you, do you feel like that is the reason that banking is trying to move to a cloud, that end user experience, obviously, move to a cloud solution? Is cost savings a big motivator there?
Yeah, I think cost savings can be a big motivator. In fact, that's one of the things I want to talk about with the professor, Professor Norbert, when he's on the show later today. I do want to ask him about some of the cost implications of cloud and some of the things he's saying there. So we'll come back to that thought, but I do think cost optimization is got to be a consideration for banks as well as any other larger organization with some scale to them. But I also think it could be a privacy, data security type of thing as well. I would suspect due to regulatory issues and or just some of the different governments throughout the world in terms of how they regulate banks, there's probably some limitations on what you can and can't do with some of that sensitive financial data, in addition to some of the privacy laws like GDPR in Europe and other parts of the world where data privacy in general is being more closely regulated. So I have to think it's somewhat of a data privacy and or cybersecurity issue as well. That's pure speculation. I'm not a banking or financial services expert by any means, but I would think based on what we're seeing in other industries, that's probably the case here as well.
Absolutely. It's very interesting because we had in 2019, Capital One suffered one of the largest data thefts that ever happened, and settled lawsuits for $80 million in strengthening security. And it still is continuing to move towards that cloud solution. So I wondered, obviously, banks have never been known from a consumer operations standpoint to provide top-notch experience, even though I will say Capital One, I would say, is probably on the forefront of more of that immediate type of transactions. But continuing to move to a solution that is so risky, it seems like cost might be part of those motivators, as well as just overall customer experience.
Yeah, I agree.
The other industry that has had an interesting experience for the last 2 years is retail. So I found some retail trends, and again, wanted to kind of talk to you about a few of the software options that retailers now are utilizing. We obviously know that they have gone to a huge e-commerce or hybrid option, but they also are investing in softwares that kind of showcase where there are in-store bigger crowds or kind of heat mapping as far as those risks that can go associated with that. So I wanted to share some of those platforms.
Is this looking at heat maps of where people or customers are physically in a store, or where the heaviest traffic patterns are, or is that what you're referring to?
Yes, so it's called Ep51, and basically what the platform does is it alerts staff to there's too many people and there's a high-risk situation within indoor shopping, and it's utilized to make sure that there's safety and security within a face-to-face shopping experience. So I thought that was interesting. We've seen something similar with Amazon where they're utilizing those types of AI functions to take temperatures and to mitigate and scale any sort of risks in their actual workforce to make sure they can get product to their customers, which obviously is their main model. But I wanted to get kind of your feedback on that trend, and will we continue to see kind of these health almost types of software systems move into mainstream industries such as retail?
Well, I have two sort of very distinct responses to that. One is more based on my personal opinion of Big Brother type technologies like that, but maybe I'll save that for another time, and encourage the audience to go read 1984 by George Orwell, and that'll share my thoughts on what I think about big tech or tech tracking people's movement and behavior and things like that. But if I set aside my personal views of that, I think that there's certainly I think what it's doing is it's showing yet another use case for how technology can be used for public good or public benefit or intended public benefit, I should say, just as a qualifier. But I think that's one of the key things is just making sure that you leverage technology where it makes sense. And certainly I think from a business perspective, if you're a retailer, I think it makes a lot of sense to deploy these technologies, whether you like it or not, simply because there's so much regulation around this. And the more that retailers and other organizers or people that are impacted by public gatherings, the more people that can sort of take the matter in their own hands to manage this and to mitigate the risk of the health risks of having people close together, at least in the short term, hopefully not the long term, but at least in the short term, I think that can only help prevent the need to want to have more draconian, government regulations to manage that for you. So I think it's just a good way to sort of proactively get ahead of that. Hopefully this is all a moot point, and in 2 or 3 years that technology has no use case because we don't need it. But based on where we are today, who knows? I don't think any of us expected to still be talking about this 2 years later, but here we are talking about it 2 years later. So it sounds like it's time for technology to provide another solution that might help.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue to some of the other trends that I've seen, specifically within the AI industry and utilizing that technology for COVID-19. So a new AI software actually nearly predicted Omicron's structure, which I don't know if you're familiar with trying to predict a variant's structure, but apparently it has over 200,000 known structures that are mapped. And then this specific protein is what makes it so easily transmitted. So basically what they're saying future state for this AI software is they're able to utilize that to see and predict different variants for COVID-19. But also in our top 10 trends for technology, we see the opportunity to actually influence DNA when that moves into healthcare. And by spinning different DNA strands to actually match proteins that will be more resilient to any sort of disease or virus type of thing. So definitely some huge movement there in that area. And I know we talked a lot about health trends, but I wondered, Eric, is this something that in the healthcare industry, you obviously help a lot on the system side, but have you had those conversations with your healthcare clients or network about kind of emerging technologies and what that might look like for their future state products or services?
I have not directly, but I know we have team members that have had more direct frontline conversations with some of these healthcare clients. One thing that just sort of bridging the conversation you just had, that you just brought up about the retailer technology that allows you to sort of show that heat map of where there's concentrations of people. I wonder if there's a way to combine, kind of leverage that in the same way for healthcare providers, where they can see whether, regardless of whether or not they fully understand the $200,000 or $250,000 or 250,000 as a variants of Omicron, or what is it? 200,000? What'd you say that was?
It is 200,000 different structures.
Different
So
structures.
basically, it's like process mapping, but for an actual disease variant, if you will.
Okay. So I don't know if there's a way to combine those technologies, but that sounds like that might be interesting to see, where COVID's being tracked and, where the concentration of COVID cases are. I imagine there's technology that can do that, or maybe predict where there might be potential outbreaks or risks of outbreak. I would think that technology exists, just certainly with AI and predictive analytics and stuff like that. I would think there's got to be ways to do that. But to answer your question, though, I don't know. I haven't seen that. Most of my experience with healthcare has been more on the EHR, the electronic health records and supply chain management and some of the more, traditional healthcare technologies. But I suspect that these types of emerging technologies that you're talking about are going to become more and more increasingly important to some of these healthcare providers throughout the world.
Yeah, I think the thing that always triggers my skepticism is just how accurate are they? We've seen a lot of specific healthcare type of tests where we're talking about 65% accuracy, those types of things. So if you're getting, not an accurate result, how is that hurting or is that helping, right? It's great to see new frontiers of technology. But in genetic testing, I know there's been lots of talk of these big pharmaceutical or medical device companies trying to push out something that might not be ready yet. So just understanding the need and arming doctors kind of with that organizational change conversation of this is a great test, but we have to remember the accuracy and what we could get as far as results. Because when you're dealing with human behavior, obviously that can be a very scary and vulnerable conversation. So definitely interesting, but a walk before you run type of mentality, I think. Definitely very cool on the research side, though, for COVID-19 and those different variants.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see if speaking of human behavior, you're talking about a topic that's been highly politicized throughout the world. And so you wonder, are there parties and different stakeholders, whether it's governments or the healthcare providers themselves or the end patients or consumers, that maybe don't want that data or that technology to exist because it doesn't fit a certain narrative? So that's the other thing is, could there be resistance in the industry or from regulators to adopt that kind of technology because it's so pure, for lack of a better word, and would there be a need or a want to not have that sort of transparency or that clarity in the data? I don't. It's more of a question than anything, but I could see that becoming a sticking point or a point of resistance for organizations adopting that sort of technology.
Yeah, it's like you kind of know where I'm going in all of my articles today. Speaking of government, I wanted to bring up a very hot topic right now, specifically when we talk about Europe and the U.S. and specific sanctions on Russia because of the current climate on the Ukrainian border. And we talk a lot about sanctions in our current political climate of what that might mean if Russia, say, invaded Ukraine. But something that I didn't know was that we, as the U.S. government, can provide technology sanctions. So basically, that's going over and saying any American software, any American patent, any American system that's based in America, there's no access to. It's removing a lot of the data hosting if it is hosted overseas or in a different European country, what that might look like. And I was really curious when I heard that to get your reaction to that, just because you know software vendors so well, and I can't imagine going to, say, Oracle as the U.S. government and saying, oh, by the way, you can't have any operations in Russia, and then be like, okay, we're not going to do that. And I think that's the thing that they're trying to convince these vendors on more of a patriotic level to not support that Russian business with technology sanctions. So I wanted to get your reaction to that and see, what you thought about how vendors or the overall community would react to that.
We're covering the whole spectrum of controversy or potential controversy today. We've got politics. We're talking geopolitics here, and soon maybe we can get to religion here if we have time. Really spice things up a little bit.
Yeah.
No, but in all seriousness, though, I think it does raise a bunch of conflicting questions or conflicting points of view that I could probably argue either side. But one is is it right? I use the word quotes for that. Is it right? Is it ethically moral? Whatever you want to call it, for any government to limit who or what a business sells, provided that the product's not illegal, of course. But like a technology provider that provides something that can help organizations, is that right to limit who they can sell to or not? Is the potential patriotic view, does that outweigh the potential downside? So I think it's it's just more of a question than anything. And then the other thing is, when you think about, I know equality and just quality in general is becoming, especially in the U.S. and other parts of the world, equality is becoming. It's always been important, but it's just sort of a topic we're revisiting and diving into in recent years. It seems like just where our society is. So it raises the question of, should there be winners and losers, or people that do or don't have access to technology just because they're based in a country that maybe doesn't agree with another country? So I guess I don't have a good answer for you. I honestly don't have a strong opinion on it either. I just think that there's very distinct trade-offs, and just like most decisions that you have to make regarding technology and digital transformation, like we talk about in this show, I guess you just have to prioritize what's most important to you and take a stance based on that. And honestly, I hadn't thought through this topic, but it's a very interesting one that I don't think has a clear answer.
Yeah. I had never heard of technology being almost weaponized in that way or being leveraged in that conversation when we're talking about diplomacy. I think the main trend we see for 2022 is just the government needing the technology. And we've kind of seen that dynamic play out in a variety of ways with big data, big tech, and the legislation around that, and really kind of catching up from the process side of how does the government process meet the emerging technologies, which is, a bigger conversation just in general. So
Yeah.
with that, we'll end on a lighter note. I know you love the guessing games.
Yes.
So
Especially when I
we
bomb
have,
out. It's probably more
yeah,
entertaining for
right.
you in the audience than it is me, but that's what we're here for.
So we have a Forbes article here that outlines the top 10 tech trends that will transform the world in 2022. And so I wanted to see if you could guess a few of them, because you've talked about them before as well, and then maybe we could go through a few others that we haven't.
Are you asking me to guess all 10 of them? That's a big...
I'm asking you to guess a few. So let's
Okay.
see where you get. Like if you get a bunch right, we'll keep going. But if you get all of them wrong, I don't want to embarrass you or anything.
Once I start striking out, that's when we'll move on.
Yeah.
So, and these are specific technologies that are changing the world, or types of technologies that are changing the world?
So it's trends in technologies that are the top 10 that they have profiled.
Okay. So I'd say, artificial intelligence, you brought that up. I'd say that's got to be in the top 10 somewhere, maybe up toward the top 3 or 5. Is that pretty high up on the list?
Yep, that's pretty high.
Okay. I'd also say, I'm trying to think of what the right word is, but anything to do with e-commerce or kind of automating the customer experience, kind of the customer-facing technologies, e-commerce, anything like that at the top of the list?
Not in that way. It's not in here.
Well, Forbes is wrong then. I mean, that's definitely got to be.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
And artificial intelligence is number 4. So
Okay.
there's a couple above that are more very, very general.
What about like machine learning or robotic process automation?
So it has like virtual reality in here, more on kind of the consumer side as opposed to the business side, but still high on the list.
What about open architectures and open source, things like that? Is that one of the 10?
It has autonomous technology. So basically talking about how your phone is now your computer, and 10 years ago your phone can do more than what supercomputers can do 10 years ago. So kind of on the same lines. But they have things also like new energy solutions rounds out the list at number 10, which you've talked about a lot in just the overall evolution of the energy industry. They have nanotechnology and material science, which I thought was a pretty interesting one. Car batteries, making solar energy more affordable, that type of thing. So along the same lines of like material sourcing that are more eco-friendly. We talked a lot about gene editing technology in our last one, and that synthetic type of biology. 3D printing is in here, which I thought was kind of interesting, and just talking about the traditional methods to streamline manufacturing processes as opposed to trying to battle a broken supply chain. And then I think these two kind of go together, and things you've always talked about is big data and overall digital trust. So making sure that data is utilized in a new way, and then also the datafication of businesses. Datafication is the word of the day, just in case you were wondering.
Datafication. Good to know.
Yep. So obviously, huge contributors to operational excellence and leveraging data as a part of your business strategy. And then the last one, which is actually number 2 on the list, because you guessed number 1, is just the connectivity. So, the Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, those types of things, that everything essentially from your thermostat to your toothbrush to, your car to your everything is connected. So just some trends to kind of round out and kind of set the stage for your conversation with Norbert, because I know you guys are going to cover some trends as well.
Yeah, yeah. I choked under the pressure and missed most of those that now seem obvious now that you went through those. What was number one again? Which one is number one?
Number one was the ambiguous computing. So just saying that computers are all around us, wrist, cars,
Got you.
household appliances, that type of thing. So again, these are super general.
Who thinks of these terms? I always wonder, like, who came up with that word, like datafication and would you say ambiguous technology? I've never heard that phrase.
Ambiguous computing.
Or ambiguous computing. Someone's got too much time on their hands. But but great, now we've got more trends to talk about, which is cool. And I agree with them, by the way. I mean, everything you're saying in general, aside from the buzzwords or the weird, cool name that it's given, I agree with the general underlying concepts, though. It makes a lot of sense. So it's super interesting. Well, one thing I want to find out, though, speaking of Norbert, and we'll take a quick break and we'll come back to him. But when he's on the show, I want to ask him about, we're certainly going to talk about trends, but one of the things I want to get into as well is just understanding sort of the reality of what he's actually seeing in the research of what companies and organizations are actually leveraging versus what software vendors are developing. Because I think, you're starting to see a bit of a disconnect in the industry where, AI is a good example, or some of the other trends you talked about. They're cool emerging trends that might be a little bit more mainstream in 3, 5, or 10 years, which is why it's an emerging trend and why it's sort of forward thinking. But you kind of have to back up and look at, well, in reality, what's actually happening today, and that's what I want to see, or maybe dive into with Norbert in his research as well. So we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have Professor Norbert on the show from University of Potsdam in Germany. And we'll dive into some of the research he's done over the years, over 20 years of doing research. I think he's studied about 2,000 different ERP implementations and digital transformations dating back to the, I think, the late 90s is around the time he started, right around the time I started in the industry as well. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 51. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as all the audio podcast platforms like Google, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Pandora, etc. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us there. Excited for our next guest. This is a guest that I met not too long ago in Germany. I was speaking at a conference that he hosted and facilitated in the Germany area, and in my time there, I learned a bit about his background and his research and some of the interesting things that he's doing in the industry. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to have him on the show to talk about some of his quantitative research and also to provide us another global viewpoint that looks outside of where Kyler, you and I are, and looks to the European region in particular, and looking at some of the differences between digital transformations in different parts of the world. And we have a global team. We have an office in Europe. But it's always good to have other people from outside the company, our company, to be on the show as well. And that's exactly why we wanted to have Norbert on the show. So with all that being said, Norbert, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for inviting me to this live stream.
Absolutely. And conversation. First of all, maybe just I haven't said much about your background other than the fact that you're a professor and you do research, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, where you teach, what your background is, et cetera.
Yeah, of course. I'm an engineer by study, and there's a noise somebody mentions. I don't know what the noise is from. And then I needed a job at the university, and I went to computer science, and I stayed there for a couple of years. I finished my PhD, and then I got tenure at another university, and and all the time I did some consulting around ERP and all other business information systems, but only when a customer would call me and say he had a very difficult problem that other consultancies could not solve. So I came into the consulting area, and 10 years ago I founded my own consulting company, Potsdam Consulting and Advisory. And I think our insights, and I will come to research and to the combination of research and practice in a minute, especially when you ask me some questions about that. Our special insight is that we look at the technology. So what is actual current technology, but we are not computer science guys because we do not ignore people. We do not ignore users, managers, middle managers, and so on. And we think additionally that the process, the business process, the value generating process is also quite important. And so we have this triangle, and we always see in research and in consulting the sides of this triangle.
Right. So you've been in this space for quite some time. You're
Yeah.
In addition to your consulting, you're also a professor at University of Potsdam. What courses do you teach there? Maybe tell us a little bit about your academic side.
Yeah. Well, yesterday I taught both sides of the scale. First, for beginners, business administration and information systems beginners, I taught some SQL, structured query language, very basic instructions. And then later on, for our master program, I told architectures of business systems, of information systems in business. So these huge landscapes that huge companies like the telecom companies, the airline companies, car manufacturers have, hundreds of different information systems, and how to manage in practice these information systems to keep pace with technology advance and with the business advancements. So this is both sides of the scale I taught yesterday the same morning. Yeah.
Great. So you've got a pretty varied background, ranging from detailed beginner technology sort of technical courses all the way to some of the more strategic stuff, which we'll talk about.
Exactly. That makes the profession so interesting. And we have the saying in Germany: if you can do it, then you should do it. If you can't do it, then teach it. And sorry to say that, if you can't teach, then go into consulting. So I'm in all three areas. I'm doing, and I'm also in consulting, and sometimes I also teach.
Here we are.
Yeah. So okay.
So quick question for you then, and sorry to interrupt. I lost my feed for a second there, so I missed part of what you said. But I wanted to ask you a quick follow-up question on the ERP Congress, which is the event that I met you at for the first time in person. This was the event in October of 2021, and you asked me to speak at that event. Tell us a little bit about ERP Congress in Germany and sort of what was the impetus for that, and then we'll get into some of the questions about your research after that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We organize this Congress every year as an event for around the ERP prize competition. We hand out an award every year for some of the best ERP vendor companies and the best ERP products in Europe, or in the German-speaking countries at least. And this is there's a fight every year of to get this award, to be awarded with this thing. It's like an Oscar for the ERP industry.
Pretty big deal.
And Yeah, around this award ceremony, we organize a conference and invite some famous keynote speakers like you, Eric, in the last year, and we try to inform neutrally, so without taking any sides, what is happening in the areas of technology, what should companies do when they have a problem with their existing ERP system, or when they want to go into new businesses or want to find out what's the advantage of using AI or whatever, big data or analytics or something like that. It's a 2-day event, and we are a little bit exhausted afterwards, but it's a very good event because it's the main German ERP event. You can name it that way.
Okay, great. Yeah, it was a great event, and even though there was a lot I didn't understand because so much of it was in German, it was very good content from what I could gather out.
Thank you very much.
I had Google Translate open the entire time so I could enter words.
Oh, very good.
Translate to English because I don't speak German. But it was a very good session. I enjoyed it, and it was fun to meet you and other team members there too. So I guess to start, and actually I'm going to ask the audience a question or ask them to respond to this real quickly, and then I'm going to jump into the questions I have for you. But for the audience, those of you that are watching this live, I'd love to hear, if you think about ERP and digital transformation research or benchmarks or data, what kind of data would you be looking for, as far as just things that would be of interest or topics of interest or data sets that might be interesting to help provide some lessons to your digital transformation project, wherever you might be in your journey? I guess that's more of a question for the audience, because I'd love to see kind of what metrics would they expect to see, or what sort of metrics would they be interested in seeing from your data, assuming it exists. So while the audience is answering that question in the live chat here, question for you then is maybe just give us a little bit of an overview of some of this research you've done over the years. What does it look like? What were you trying to find? What was the impetus for the whole thing?
Yeah, we started 20 years ago when I was invited to a big German car parts manufacturer. He makes the gearboxes, and I was asked, we have a tiny requirement to change in our information system. I don't say the name of the vendor, but it's one of the main vendors of ERP systems in the world, and it's not coming from the US but from Germany. We have a tiny new requirement, a very tiny requirement, and it costs us millions, literally millions of dollars or euros to fix this tiny requirement. Can't there be a more adaptive, we coined the word adaptive or changeable enterprise system that is much easier to adapt to new requirements? So that was our first task in research, and we came up with a lot of ideas how new architectures of ERP systems should be provided. But to make it short, nearly none of these ideas is made it into practice because we have this relational database paradigm, and we have some applications running on application servers, and the data models grow and grow and grow, and the data itself also grows. And so the systems are becoming complex and even more complex. And when you read about missing success with implementing new ERP systems, that's partly also a problem of the complexity. And there are even some people outside that think interfaces between different systems are bad, and you should try to integrate everything into one single system. That I don't know whom that helps, but it does not help conquer or even manage the complexity. So that was the first task. And then we started another thing that we are continuing to do. We count beans, not beans, but numbers of installations of ERP systems in the German-speaking market. German-speaking market is about 120 million people, so it's not very big, but a lot of small and medium-sized ERP vendors are located in these German-speaking countries. I mentioned one, I didn't mention it by name, but I mentioned it by the place of birth in Germany, in Waldorf, Germany, one of the big vendors stemming from there. It's a huge one, the SAP, but there are many, more than 300, 400 smaller ones. And then later when we looked into other countries, we see these small vendors in nearly every other country, whether it's South Africa, it's the UK, it's the United States. You can sustain an ERP business as a vendor when you have 30 to 50 people working for you. Then it's even then it's sustainable. It will not grow, and it will not adapt all new technologies and business opportunities very fast, but you can survive. And so we have the situation that we have 300 different ERP systems, and that's part of my consultancy to find out which is the best long term. Long term means at least for 10 years for my customers. Yeah, and on the other hand, perhaps we will come to that as well. On the other hand, the vendors are also the small and medium-sized vendors ask me and my team at the university. I have about 45 people running or working for me at the university, and they ask me, we read about new technologies like AI. Now the main technology where what I can overview, the ERP vendors make some investments in. The main technology is AI, artificial intelligence. So they desperately try to make more use of the huge amount of data they collected. But we see, and we can come to it in a minute, we see that there are, of course, some other capabilities required, not only technology, not only developers, but some other capabilities are required. So this is, we see the technology, we see the process, we see the business advantages, all the business disadvantages, and you prepared some very nice questions. What are the issues? What do I recommend? Perhaps we come to that later. Yeah.
All right, very interesting stuff. We're going to take a quick break. We'll continue the conversation when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Relax, don't do it when you wanna go to it. Relax, don't do it when you wanna come. Relax.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Professor Norbert. We're talking about some of his research and findings based on his experience in academic research over the years. So let's jump back into the conversation where we left off. Well, I guess just to start then, that's a helpful overview of sort of the two threads or the two main drivers of why you started this research and what problem you were trying to solve or what questions you were trying to answer. But when you look at just ERP implementations, digital transformations in general, what were some of the, you've been doing this a long time, but what are some of the biggest findings you have, whether they're quantitative or qualitative findings from your research? What are some of the biggest lessons?
We can distinguish several phases. In the first phase, it was just automation. No, it was not even automation. It was just bringing manual processes to computerized processes. Not very much automation, but you wanted to have your data on a computer to be able to be accessed from anywhere and from more people than before. That was the first phase that went till I would say the early 2000s. So then there came a phase of consolidation because there was not so much innovation in the ERP area, more functionality, yes, and more specific data models, yes, but no innovation. Then many managers in companies came to the conclusion ERP is quite expensive, and we can cut cost on ERP. We can lift. We do not need a maintenance contract. We do not need upgrades anymore. We do not need qualified people in our company, but we can always call India for support. And this is the second phase. We see that a lot of competitive advantage vanished in this period of time. And since I would say 3 to 5 years, we have the third phase, and this is the taking the ERP system as the backbone of the business information processing and trying to implement innovation like AI, like big data, like analytics and so on. And but not only into ERP, but in other systems connected to the ERP landscape. And this is the third phase. And this makes more fun, of course, because if you always have cost-cutting discussions, that's no fun at all, because it does not end with the vendor. It also comes to you as a consultant. But if you see companies that want to spend money to improve their competitive ability with IT, then the fun starts. And then then Corona came, the COVID virus. Then in some companies the fun just stopped again. But we have some e-tailers, so e-commerce retailers that did very well during the COVID pandemic, and they spent tremendous amounts of money to improve their competitive ability and to make their processes better. And that's the third stage. Well, yeah, your company is also named, but this is a parallel I didn't think of before. This stems from our observation of nearly 2,000 ERP projects in the last 20 years in the German-speaking countries. So these 3 stages, and now we are in a fun state on the one hand, last sentence, but on the other hand, some companies that thought IT is not important, people that know of IT are not important, they don't do well now. They have problems. They have real problems now.
Interesting. So the 3 phases, then you had the first stage, which was the sort of the initial automation. Second stage,
computerization. I would call it computerization. It's And now we can talk. We can speak of automation, but in the first years it was just computerization.
Yeah, just taking manual processes and moving them to computers.
Yeah.
Second stage was cutting costs, but potentially at the expense of also cutting value, business value.
Yeah.
And then the third stage now is the sort of the competitive advantages using digital to further their business models. What are in this third stage that you're seeing now in the last 3 to 5 years? What are some of the big findings? I mean, what are what are some of the trends or some of the data sets or high level metrics that really stand out or jump out from your research?
I see the AI trend, artificial intelligence trend, is more a trend for vendors for now. It's not where the customers, my customers from the industry ask me what can we use AI, and I tell them, well, you need the data, you need the models for prediction, and you need the use cases, and then you can start. And when we look at the data, it's this master data management topic is some topic that does not work well in most companies. So they have very individualistic data sets, and AI in the ERP area doesn't work well with very scarce data sets. The AI works well when you have millions of unique data, but not when you have there a little bit and there a little bit and no bridge between it. So that's one of the problems. What we have a question here from the audience about value, the value of ERP and the value of these investments. So what we do, what we always try to do, is to calculate the value of the investment. We do this of the ERP or the IT technology investment. We do this while we compare the actual state with the old processes and the old functions with the intended state, when we have automated processes and when we have all system functionality available. Because that is sometimes different when you use a system with a huge functionality. You have more functions, but system is sometimes also more expensive. And on the other hand, you can get a lot of improvements, like in manufacturing and logistics, when you use a smaller and cheaper system. So, and we compare this, and when you compare this, then you always can come up with some productivity gains, with the opportunity to reach more revenues or to cut cost on stocks and things like that. And that is there are some sums that are big. So big means 6 or 7 figures, and some are very small. And of course, no company we investigate has more than 20 ROI potentials in their processes, but otherwise they would no longer exist when they had 100. Or we always go into the company with about 300 or 400 questions about ROI. Always covering one single functionality, and 20 turn out as valid, and then we can sum it up and come up with some information about the potential value. And this is in one case, the investment is 7 million over 7 years, 7 million, and we can compare euro and US dollar here for this interview. 7 million in 7 years, and the yearly return on investment is about 2.5 million euro. So that means in 3 years, your 7 years costs are covered, and then you are not only even, but you are better than before. This information is quite necessary for some of the companies, because they have to report to boards or to owners, or they're publicly noted, and then they have to figure out they have to justify their investment in IT, because money is always scarce, and everybody in manufacturing loves to buy new machines, because you can see the machine for 5 million. Even if the machine is not running, you at least have the machine standing in your factory. But a new enterprise system, a new IT, you do not see anything. You see a new icon on your browser, and this is 2 million euro or $2 million for a new icon. That's quite expensive. So it's absolutely necessary that you need to calculate the business value, and we have some experience with that, with this calculating the value. Unfortunately, not all our customers want to have us calculating the value. Some say, well, it's self-evident that we need a new system, and then we calculate the cost, or the vendor calculates the cost of the new system, and then they say, well, it's quite expensive, and can't we come up with another solution? And then we wished we had calculated also the business value. So business value is quite important, and it's possible to calculate it, but you need a little bit of experience for that.
So is that the numbers you just mentioned, the $7 million total investment, and then the 2.5 million annual return? Is that an average in your data set? Is that the average cost and ROI for the average?
No,
Or is that
well,
just
that is, it depends from many factors. It depends, as you know, how many users you have, concurrent users or named users, how many application consulting is necessary. So it's I try to convince my business customers when there is an ROI over 2 to 3 years, then the investment is fine. Because you have always an acceleration curve in learning, so you can't use 100% of your new system from day one, but you slowly discover new information there and new value, and but after 1 or 2 years you know everything what is necessary, and then you have the full potential there. So 2 years is fine. In some cases, in very rare cases, there is no business value. Or no sufficient business value, but some of these companies have neglected their IT, their ERP for 10 to 20 years. I once met a company that had no maintenance contract for 20 years, 21 years, no maintenance contract. So that means they have a software solution that was probably invented in the 1990s. For Windows 95, and and now we have different times here, and there is no business value because the investment is now huge, but it's nevertheless necessary.
So what percentage approximately, if you had to, I don't know if you have this exact data in front of you or in memory, but approximately how many digital transformation and ERP projects do you think receive a positive ROI within 2 to 3 years, as you mentioned, in this third stage we're talking about? I know 10 or 20 years ago, maybe it's a different number, but more recently, what kind of metrics are you seeing there? It looks like we just lost Norbert, so I'm going to give him a second to come back on here, and he's back. There he is.
Yeah, I'm back. So I got your question, but your question was how many of these projects have a positive ROI from the third stage? Well, unfortunately, we observed post-mortem, post-project 2,000, around 2,000 of these projects. But of course, nearly nobody wants to tell us what was the investment. They only tell us what was the number of licenses they bought, and but nearly never they tell us how much consulting effort they spent. So I cannot come up with a key figure how much is the success rate. But I can say when it will be absolutely not successful, when IT is a commodity, when you don't build up knowledge in your company on ERP, and when you are not bold in your decisions, and fourth and last, when you do not hold to your initial objectives, so your initial goals, what you wanted originally to achieve with the new system. So when you don't do this, all of this, then you won't be successful.
So you see the correlation of what not to do, and the negative impact it has on your outcome.
Yeah.
All right, very interesting stuff. We're going to take a quick break. We'll continue the conversation when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Professor Norbert. We're talking about some of his research and findings based on his experience in academic research over the years. So let's jump back into the conversation where we left off. Do you have a sense from your quantitative and qualitative data of whether or not with new emerging technologies like AI, you mentioned before, it's more of a thing for vendors? Vendors are more focused on AI than actual end users, which I totally agree with, by the way. That's what we see with our clients as well. It's very immature in terms of real use cases. Yeah. But with these new emerging technologies that have a certain price tag that go along with it, and even cloud solutions too, where you have ongoing subscriptions and sort of a higher annual ongoing cost, are you seeing a trend, either positive or negative, towards getting more or less of an ROI, even though you don't have exact numbers, because a lot of companies aren't sharing the exact cost or the exact benefit? Do you have at least have a sense of where the needle is moving? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What do you see there?
Well, it depends how the project is conducted. When the project is conducted in a nice manner and not everybody who has a wish or a requirement gets this requirement implemented, then you can get a huge ROI and business value. Especially when you stay to your original goals and objectives, what you wanted to achieve in the market. But the problem is the situation, the environment is changing. The company management changes, ownership changes, the economic environment might change for some companies. We have some legislation in Europe, like these GDPR topics that cost a lot of money and helps nearly nothing for the customers. So it's not quite easy, because the subject of study, the company and the ERP system, does not stay in the same state for 2 years or for 3 years. If you compare your companies, you observe from 2019, which was pre-pandemic, to 2022, you will find out that the organization has changed, the business model in some cases has changed, the products have changed, customer behavior has changed. So that's the problem of reality. Everything is changing, so it's not so easy to put something in concrete and watch it for 2 or 3 years. So unfortunately, I cannot say it's always 43%. That's therefore I'm too much professor to answer this.
You sound like me. It depends, right? It depends on what.
But it's typically a lawyer would say it depends. Yeah.
Right. Or consultants or professors. I guess that's what we've established.
Yeah.
We all. So in the research you've done over the 20 years, whether, maybe I'll leave you flexibility on how you want to answer this, whether you focus on the more recent third phase or stage of ERPs implementations, or whether you look more longer term. What are some of the biggest surprises in the data? Like when you started consulting and then you do this research, what sort of jumped out as sort of a surprise to you, or something you didn't know? Maybe some big learnings from.
We always ask the customers, the customers that buy a new ERP system or use a new ERP system, what influences their decision. And of course, in the first years, functionality was on top. Functionality. And of course, that's the reason you buy a standard software system, because you want to have immediate use of a predefined functionality. But what comes then? In the early days, it was, of course, cost advantage and usability and things like that, because the older systems, like these green screen systems, had not a very great usability for tasks you did not do daily. For daily tasks, it was fantastic. I remember these United clerks at the gates at United Airlines, and you wanted to do a complex operation of rebooking your flight, and they clack, 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 and in 30 seconds they were ready, new boarding pass, a new invoice, collect your credit card, and so on. That was fantastic because they do it every day. But for in ERP, you have a lot of tasks you do once a month or once a year, and therefore usability was in need, very much in need. That has changed. Usability is no longer an issue, but the architecture, the technical architecture of the system is now the number two in deciding, in decision making on a new ERP system. And that was something that I'm always an architecture guy, but I'm a computer scientist by my PhD. But most of the managers out there are no computer scientists, but business administration people. And now they also decide to go for the good architectures. So we as consultants, and also we at the university have to come up with a judgment. What is a good architecture? Not only for the ERP as a single system, but for the whole landscape of IT systems you have out there. And that's an interesting topic also for the next couple of years.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I mean, it fits what I believe to be important, but it's interesting to hear that buyers of enterprise technology are viewing that as a very important number two criteria. What are some of the other general trends? You talked a little bit about AI, and you talked about how the three different stages of transformation over the years. You've talked about how architecture is becoming more important. Technical architecture is becoming important in the evaluation process. What other trends are you seeing? What are some of the other trends that enterprise software buyers or potential buyers are aware of?
There is a very interesting gap between what vendors want. They want to get their customers into the cloud, and what the customers actually do, because they calculate, and in many cases, more than I expected, they come to the conclusion that cloud is way too expensive. So they do not go in that case, they do not go the whole way to the cloud, but they stop halfway and go, for instance, for hosting or housing or some other services in that area. So they no longer do it for themselves. They don't have the hardware in the basement and try to fulfill all the security requirements. But sorry for the noise here. But they don't go into the cloud like with completely new offers. So some offers like data storage or also analytics capabilities. We will see it also with AI when the AI models will be available. They will be in the cloud. They won't be ever available on the hardware in the basement of the factory. But with the traditional systems, at least what we see in Europe, it's not only Germany, it's Europe. We see customers are reluctant to go in the cloud. That's sometimes an infrastructure topic, but sometimes it's a trust topic. But sometimes, in most cases, it's a cost topic, because the cloud is cheap in the first year and in the second year, but afterwards it's expensive because the costs are the same every year, and a license is paid, and then you have usage of the license, you have maintenance contracts. But so cloud is not so fast in the ERP business, because ERP, I would not say this of CRM and of some other IT services like Office 365 and things like that. But for ERP, the cloud adoption rate is slow.
Yeah, and I think the vendors benefit more than anyone from this, and their investors benefit because you get a predictable, sustainable revenue model that's very high margin that investors like, vendors like it, and so therefore that becomes the talking point, which is cloud is better. Cloud is better. Everyone's moving to cloud. If you don't move to the cloud, you're dying. So I think it's a really good point that you bring up, which is, you can go to the cloud where it makes sense, but it doesn't mean you need to double down and just throw everything in the cloud right now because
exactly.
it's cost. I'd be curious to see. I've always thought, and this is speculation or sort of hypothesis of what I think will happen in the future. You talked about that second stage of where companies sort of went from computerization to then how do we cut our costs to kind of cut back on our how much we're spending on IT. Do you think we'll see another phase of that after? So you get all these companies that are moving to the cloud, and then they wake up one day and realize, wow, we're spending a lot of money on these subscriptions that we can't get out of. Do you think there'll be a day of reckoning in 3 or 5 or 10 years where people will maybe shift back and maybe try to scale back their cloud contracts or move back to on-premise or do something different? Or do you think this is just where we're going?
I don't think they will shift back, but there will be more competition with cloud services because cloud services are more comparable to each other, and the step away from one cloud vendor or functionality vendor to a couple of vendors is easier when you are in the cloud, because the next possible service provider is for some bill of material calculation or warehouse management is only one click away. So we will see a competition there. I don't think that's my proposition. I don't think they will come back and install ERP systems under their desktops, but I think we will see more competition in the cloud competing on some services.
That'll start to drive some of that cost down, so you get more options and
exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. What are you alluded to this? You started to answer this indirectly related to another question, but maybe I'll ask it more explicitly here. But that is what in your research, what are some of the issues or challenges that organizations are struggling with the most in their ERP implementations or digital transformations?
As I mentioned before, when IT is seen from the management as a commodity, like electrical power, then it comes to problems. So, it influences the competitive ability in both ways. If you go forward with your IT, it influences in a positive way. But if you don't go forward, it influences in a negative way, and you create cost in personnel, in management efforts, and also in IT maintenance efforts. And you can't cut these without giving you danger to your business processes. So this is what I see in some of the managers' decisions. They have not yet seen that IT is not the same like telephone service or like electrical power or gas, but it's something different. It's something that has to be invested in, and also knowledge has to be collected in the company. And I always tell my customers in consulting, you can't rely on forever on me. You have to find out something on your own.
Yeah.
But only something, not everything.
Right. So coming back to this cloud trend question, I'm going to share a question here, which is from Malcolm on LinkedIn. He asked the question of how many on-premise systems will there be in 5 years? Do you have a sense of maybe a rough percentage? Or I know you probably don't have data that predicts that, or maybe you do. I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I told you that the transfer rate to the cloud is slow, and I would say we have, when I make a bold judgment now, we have in the German-speaking countries, I would say we have 80% of the systems are running on premise. When you also think that housing and hosting is also on premise, because it's an individual system on individual hardware maintained in an individual state of software. So it's it's only the Ethernet cable, the Ethernet connection is different, but it's not cloud. Cloud means it's anywhere, and it may not even be on a certain hardware, and therefore I think 80% are on premise now. And now you ask me how much of this, I would say 70% will be on premise in 5 years. We should meet, Eric, we should meet at least in 5 years and
I will
speak about that prediction. Yeah.
January of 2027. You're saying that so 10% more will be in the cloud? Oh,
yeah, only 10% more. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting.
I may be wrong, but in the moment, I see adoption rate is quite slow and costs are very, very high. And every manager can calculate the costs and says, well, why should I do that? Where is my business advantage?
Right.
Yeah.
All right, very interesting stuff. We're going to take a quick break. We'll continue the conversation when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control. So for all you listeners of Transformation Ground Control, I wanted to remind you of a premier annual event that we host every year. It's called Digital Stratosphere. It's a virtual conference that we've actually shifted to virtual since the pandemic. And we're having our next Digital Stratosphere conference online, virtually, February 8th through the 10th. So I encourage you to register for that. Myself and others from the Third Stage team will be hosting sessions, facilitating sessions about software selection, how to implement software, what some of the best practices are, change management, digital strategy, program management, all the stuff you need to know to make your digital transformation successful in 2022 and beyond. This event's for you. Registration's free. We encourage you and your teams to join. If you're not able to join us live, which we hope you will, but if you can't join us live, we'll also we'll make the recordings available to you. So be sure to register either way. Even if you can't join all of the sessions live, you'll at least get access to the library of recordings. So I encourage you to check that out. There's a link below in this podcast, wherever you're listening or watching. There's a link below to register. And you can also just go to our website at Third Stage, and it's spelled THIRD, stage-consulting.com. At the top of the page, you'll see an icon for registering for Digital Stratosphere. So be sure to check it out. Digital Stratosphere, February 8th through 10th. Hope to see you there. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Professor Norbert. We're talking about some of his research and findings based on his experience in academic research over the years. So let's jump back into the conversation where we left off. So you alluded a little bit to this last a few minutes ago, but I'll bring up this question from Andre on YouTube.
Yeah.
He asked the question of how has the pandemic influenced digital trends?
Yeah, we see a main influence, of course, in thinking of work from home. Some managers didn't want to have work from home before the pandemic, and we see it in the digitalization of the processes. So things that were never ever available before the pandemic are now easily done and implemented. I give you an example. What me astonished today, I'm working at a university. You know, university administration centers are never at the forefront of innovation, and I had to clear an invoice. And I got an email, and I just had to click a link in my email, and I could do this on my iPhone. So I could say this invoice can be cleared on my iPhone by just clicking a link on my iPhone. So, and that was a real advantage. And this public administration moved in only 2 years pandemic from we do everything on paper to we do everything digital now. So I use this example not because it's a prototype for doing business, but because even the most hard-minded or no-minded people at all now think, what can we do better in the processes? How can we advance and digitalize the processes? And that experience we see also in the companies, and also this work from home paradigm. We have this discussion all the time. You see Apple, first they should all work again in the headquarter, and now they say, well, you may work 2 days at home. So and we see it in the German companies as well, that it does not depend to some extent where the work is done. To some extent, it's quite important. So we cannot cut social contacts completely. I would say 2 days at home and 3 days at the workplace might be good for both of for the employer and the employees. So I see things speeding up in the processes. I see very huge strains on the infrastructure because all these videos going on, and then you have to switch off your camera, and then then you are nearly dead. You have a meeting, an important business meeting with 8 to 10 people, and everybody has to switch off the camera. Then it's you can only work there when you know all these people very, very well. So when you can listen to them and, oh, this might be a little bit snarky, but you can't do anything. So infrastructure strain in some areas, it's a huge problem. And well, the ERP vendors, they have to do something with robotic process automation, which is an automation on the desktop of the users. But that has nothing to do with the vendors itself, in my opinion, and that's what I see. Yeah,
sure.
The strain. Yeah,
that's interesting. That's very, very interesting. What about this question? Actually, I'm gonna change this question a little bit. But the question is the German cloud market affected by German legal requirements governing where data can be held and how secured? I would actually ask that question more globally, because that's also a thing. And if you work for the United States government, or you're a contractor to the United States government, you have certain data requirements and limitations, and privacy is becoming a big deal throughout Europe and other parts of the world. So maybe just in general, how do individual countries and their legal requirements affect the cloud market in general?
Yeah, it depends in which industry you are in. If you are in a very highly regulated industry, then there are some rules. If you are a state or government-owned entity, then there are certain rules. Some companies like e-tailer or retailer are free of that, and they have to take care of customer data and person related data to single persons, but that can be done well. That it has an influence. Yes, the cloud market is a little bit influenced by that. I would not say that we have this European initiative to come up with the European cloud solution, but this is called Gaia X. But it's it's an initiative from engineers, and you should think from the user. You should not think from the engineering point of view, and it's overcomplicated, this European cloud initiative. So Amazon, Microsoft, and some others, Google, are doing here a very good job, and show us where the data is in Europe. They have all the data centers in Europe, and for most of the not regulated companies, no military things, no drugs, I mean in the positive sense, drugs, medicine, pharmaceutical companies, for most of them, that's not a problem.
Right.
In my opinion. Always, this is all my opinion,
Sure. Well, and it's an important one, just based on what you're seeing in the way companies are shifting. I think that's where we're getting to, is just how are companies shifting, and how's the economy shifting, how are regulations shifting, and that's just a good reminder of all the different things you have to navigate and stay in sync with as you go through an ERP project or digital transformation. So just a question, I guess I'd ask you around, a lot of your research is based in Eastern Europe, or the German-speaking countries within Eastern Europe. But what's different in that part of the world when it comes to ERP implementations or digital transformations? What's different there, unique there, versus other parts of the world, or vice versa?
Yeah, we sometimes see also smaller vendors from other countries coming to the German market because they heard of Industry 4.0 and all these nice technological advances, and they also want to compete there. And then they, even very small ERP using companies, generate a huge amount of specific requirements for functionality, very specific functionality. And then these companies that come from very simple manufacturing sites, and they say, well, oh no, we can't do that. We can make a custom function for you especially, but that's no competitive advantage when you have to create a custom functionality for your first German manufacturing customer. So we are not very satisfied with good looking and fast working systems with not so much functionality. And also the data model. The data model is even more important. The people want to store all kind of information around their products, their customers, their machines, and so on. And yeah, that's they don't like it. I just had an American. I once had an American vendor, a smaller American vendor. No, it was even a huge one, but I don't say its name. And he was asked, please tell us, we have to make reports, monthly reports for the value added tax we have to collect in Germany for the government. And please show us your functionality. We think you are from the United States or from the UK, and perhaps you have not this functionality in your home country. So what do you think of this value-added tax report? And the vendor from UK or US said, well, we have a very good report generator, and if you need this functionality, you can create it on your own. And he thought that would be a very good answer, but he was immediately out of the business because that's such a basic functionality for all European companies, EU European companies, except the UK, that they don't want to create their own report for the government. They want to have it as a standard functionality, and so the requirements are quite complicated in most cases. Yeah, that's part of the problem. Yeah, with the German market.
Now, what about speaking of the German market? And this is another question that we could probably broaden to other parts of the world or other cultures. But how does the German culture affect implementation and adoption? And how is that different than implementations in other countries or other parts of the world?
Well, it negatively affects implementation and adoption because we want to have a complete, clear picture of we want to have in the year 2027. And that's quite not. It's not quite easy. We're in an ERP implementation, and people want to. Some of my customers also have this approach of perfection. They want to have it perfect, and they cannot live with 85 or 90% perfection. They want to have at least 100% and perfection, and that is counterproductive. That doesn't work well. So on the one hand, we can create with very nice machinery and also some very nice cars, because we can think 2 years what the new machine or the new car would look like, and then build it. But that does not work in implementation, in ERP implementation. We have to make it short. We have to make quick wins after 6 months to 9 months at least, but then you have to show something. And if you are preparing an implementation for 2 years, and then you are, some companies were 10 years in ERP implementation. So that's ridiculous in my opinion. So we try to use agile approaches there, but you need trust. You have to trust the vendor when you start with an agile approach. Well, that's also difficult. So I think it's German culture not always helps.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you brought up culture because I was going to ask you as a follow up. So you're saying that German culture may not embrace agile in the same way that
No,
other world or other
no.
cultures may.
Yeah.
But I think in general, it's a good reminder though that whether it's a geographic culture or whether it's an organizational culture or a combination of both, you really do have to think about who are we as an organization and as a people, and how does that influence how we should be deploying new technology? Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
people try to look for that cookie cutter, one size fits all best practice, but the examples you just gave are good examples of how that's not typically the case.
Yeah,
You have to-
that's not working, and that's for nobody in the European market. It's this cookie cutter approach, a fitting approach. No,
Right.
I would say that's no, that's absolutely not valid. It's even the other way around. When somebody hears that his main competitor has a system that he nearly also wanted to implement, then he immediately switches his decision to the other system, to the number two in the rankings, because he doesn't want to have the same system like his competitor.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, so last question for you then, that I've got for you is, based on your research so far, what advice would you give to an organization or a team that's about to start a digital transformation here in 2022? What's some of from your research, all the trends you've talked about, the things you're seeing in the market, what should
Yeah.
people?
Okay, favor quick wins, acquire knowledge, be bold in your investments, and hold to the original objectives when you started your project. That's in one sentence my advice.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good summary, and those are things you mentioned earlier in the conversation as well. So that's super helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, good stuff. Thank you for being here, Professor. It's good to have you on the show, and hope to have you again soon. A lot of good stuff you shared today, and I feel like there's even more good stuff we didn't have time to get to, so we'll definitely have to have you back on the show. But in the meantime, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back and dive into some of the findings and some of the interesting points from that conversation. We'll do that as soon as we return from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Even today, if you can't, then it doesn't matter anyway. You will never understand it 'cause it happened.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name's Eric. I'm here with Kyler, and we just had Professor Gronau on the show, and we were talking about some of the academic research and trends and things he's seeing in the industry. What were some of your takeaways or aha moments from that conversation, Kyler?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the phases essentially that he laid out. Phase one, the manual process and technology. Phase two is kind of the consolidation, and then phase three was really that ERP is the backbone of the business. And I wondered if you've kind of seen almost a phase four, or if he has, that companies are often investing in more best of breed technology, as opposed to thinking that an ERP system is the backbone. That was kind of my reaction to, I wonder if that is evolving as well. And I wanted to see kind of what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I think we are seeing that in the industry, primarily for a couple of reasons. One is because the technology is changing so quickly. I think it's really hard for any single ERP system to keep up with all the trends and evolving needs of different industry niches and verticals. So that's part of it. And then I think that the magnitude or pace of change has only accelerated since the pandemic. You have organizations now that have totally different needs or requirements than what they had just 2 years ago prior to the pandemic, especially when you look at industries like retail or healthcare or some of the other industries that are more affected by this than others. And then the other thing is that, the barriers to entry. I mean, the cost of creating a software company or creating a very niche specific solution that solves a specific problem, those barriers to entry are a lot lower now than they have been in the past. And I think those barriers are continuing to come down over time. So what this all does is it creates this environment of high competition, a lot of different options in the marketplace, an inability or a struggle for the big, massive one-size-fits-all ERP vendors to keep up with all these changes. And it just it's constantly creating a bunch of new openings and niches for some of these smaller providers. So I think, organizations really need to get out of the mindset of thinking they're going to find a single ERP system to do everything they want. Even if they do have a core ERP system that might do 70 or 80% of their business, you've got to figure out how you kind of close that gap and address some of those more, call it the customer-facing or competitive advantage types of business processes that are less likely to be accommodated by a single big ERP system.
And on the same, along those lines, you and Norbert had kind of chatted about the challenges of the support systems when it comes to these more niche systems, or even systems that aren't as local. You talked about the German community and how there were a lot of systems that you had never heard of. And mostly he had said because of the lack of, whether it's vendor support, technical support, or SI support for a lot of those other systems in the area. Is that something that is really kind of true for the rest of the world besides the United States?
I think it is. I mean, I think different parts of the world have different software vendors that are stronger or weaker in those parts of the world. I guess with Germany, I didn't realize until I was there, and I got to know a lot of the software vendors that he was talking about. I got to know him and others that are very familiar with the German and the Eastern European market in general. But I guess I didn't realize the extent to which there is a lot of diversity in that particular market compared to Latin America or to Asia Pacific or other parts of the world. And I know, like in Asia Pacific, I know we found a lot of vendors there that are very unique to that. And partly because the pricing model needs to be different. I mean, you can't charge U.S. or Western European type prices and have it make any sort of economic sense for a country that's based in a developing country where there's a lower cost of living, and exchange rate issues and whatnot. So I think that just the disparity in the geographies in terms of demographics, type of industry, all that sort of stuff adds up to a bunch of diversity in the types of software vendors that you're seeing. I know in Germany, for example, because they have so many automotive related companies in that space, there tends to be a lot of vendors that sort of specialize in auto part manufacturers or automotive manufacturing, where that's probably not as big of a deal, in other parts of the world. So yeah, I think it's something to be aware of. You want to look globally, but you also want to look locally as well, as far as what your options are.
So what if you have a global organization or an organization that really their needs meet a specific software that you are going to recommend, but there's not a ton of local support for that? Is that a huge consideration when you're going through the selection process?
It can be. There's ways to mitigate that risk or that deficiency or problem. One would be to build some competencies in-house as much as you can. I mean, if you can build competencies either by hiring someone that knows a certain technology well, or teaching people on your team to learn the technology really well, to where you're not as dependent on outside parties. And I'd say that's a general best practice just overall, is just in general, anything you can do to build your own internal competencies to help provide that internal technical capability is generally a positive thing. That's one way to navigate that. The other way is to, in the global world we live in, especially in a post-pandemic global world, it's not as important that you have someone that's in your backyard or right down the street to support you. You can get support remotely a lot easier now than you could, decades ago. So I think, yes, it's important. You want to know that the resources are out there supporting you, but provided that they You can find resources that speak your language and align with your culture. It's not as important where those resources are as just whether or not they speak your language, align with your culture, and know the stuff you need them to know.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I know Norbert talked a lot about kind of business processes and the importance of really kind of diving into each part of your process from really conception to completion. And I wondered if you had in your either your experience on global clients or anything like that, discovered that supply chains can be localized when it comes to global clients as well. There can be different challenges when it comes to working in Latin America versus working in Asia, those types of things. Is that kind of the same thing as mapping out the process or business intelligence opportunities that he had mentioned on more of a global level?
Yeah, it is, or can be. You certainly, there's the internal processes, the things you do, and how you do them or how you want to do those processes. But then you have sort of the external factors you have to take into account too, like and I think this is what you're alluding to, but things like infrastructure. If you don't have access to a physical infrastructure that allows for a more frictionless flow of goods, then that, there's considerations there as far as how that affects your business requirements, because you're probably going to have a lot more workarounds and things you have to do differently because you have infrastructure limitations. And, just to give an example, it's been a few years now, so this may be less true than it was when I was last there, but in India, for example, a lot of manufacturing happening there, a lot of low-cost manufacturing plants. But when I was there, I remember the global company I was doing consulting for was having a lot of trouble just getting the product out of their manufacturing shop floor and to their warehouse, and then ultimately either to their end customers throughout Asia or to a port where they would ship it to their overseas customers. So it's things like that you have to be aware of and think about, okay, well, how does that affect the type of technology we might need? It's not that technology is going to fix that infrastructure limitation, but it means that you might have different processes or workarounds you have to work with given the fact that you have that infrastructure limitation. And then speaking of infrastructure, the other big one that's not a physical infrastructure thing, but more of a technology infrastructure is just the reliability of cloud and internet connectivity. So if you don't have good, reliable internet connectivity, what does that mean for a potential cloud solution? What do you have for on-premise potentially as a backup or a way to have more direct local access in the event that you don't have access to the internet? All those things, those are just a couple examples of how those environmental realities should contribute or should be considered as part of your business needs and requirements.
Yeah, and I know some of our audience asked during your live stream if on-prem solutions will become obsolete in the near future. And like you consultants do, you always kind of, it depends situation there. So it sounds like it's really regional based too when it comes to on-premise solutions and just the overall needs of the company. For connectivity.
Yeah, and I was floored by the part of the conversation with Norbert where he said, I may have these numbers slightly off, but I think the order of magnitude is right. But he said something to the effect of, I asked what percentage in 5 years would have transitioned from on-prem to cloud, and he said, it's 80% on-prem now. He thinks in 5 years it might be 70%. So he saw, a much more incremental adoption rate than even I was seeing. I've always been fairly skeptical of the cloud going back 10 years now, and even today I'm still skeptical of it because I think there's a lot of limitations that people don't see or want to see. But he took it to a whole nother level in terms of he appears to be even more skeptical than me, but he's basing it on data and basing on what he's actually seeing in his research. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of counterintuitive to all of the media messaging around the cloud within the industry. Like we talk about our banking example in the beginning of this episode and that huge migration, even though it can be slow in one of the most secure industries in the entire world, you would argue.
Yeah.
And what that might look like. So Definitely such interesting stuff coming from Norbert, and I'm excited that we get to partner with him at Third Stage and leverage some of his great research for our client community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll have to have him back on too and dive into more details. I was sort of overwhelmed by the breadth of areas we could dive into. So I think it'd be good to dive in more detail in some of those areas the next time he's on. Well, good. Well, that's a good wrap up for the conversation with Norbert. And again, thank you for being on the show, Professor. It's good to have you on. And speaking of guests, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Michelle Weiss from the Third Stage team, she's going to be on the show talking about how to evaluate and select the right technology for your organization. So it's a topic we've covered in other segments or other podcast episodes, but this will be the first time Michelle's been on, first of all. But second of all, she'll have a unique perspective that others just don't have, partly because of her global experience base and working with some of our clients throughout the world. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 51. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham, and you can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the audio podcast platforms that you might listen to us on. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a review, share the podcast with your colleagues, others that might find this topic or these topics interesting. Love to help get the word out, so we appreciate you sharing this and sharing your feedback on the show. So I'm excited for our next guest. We're going to play a clip of an interview that you had done previously, Kyler, with Michelle Weiss from the Third Stage team, talking about software evaluation and selection. So why don't we play the clip, and then we'll kind of come back and unpack some of that a little bit more detail. But let's cut to the clip right now.
So Michelle, can you tell me a little bit about what it means to choose a new technology for your organization, or maybe why companies might want to look at getting a new system?
Companies using outdated technology or not utilizing technology properly may find that as they grow or become more complex, a strong technology platform will better enable them to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. I know a lot of the clients we work with here at Third Stage are kind of in that high growth type of phase within their business. So there's obviously a ton of technologies out there. Some can be really simple, while others can be more on the complex side. What are some main considerations when selecting a new technology for your company?
It is important that companies look into the future, at least 3 to 5 years, and also at their current processes. That way, when they select a system, they can find one that meets their current needs as well as those needs that they will have in the future.
Absolutely. That future state is so important, and that strategic alignment that I know you and your team help our clients go through here at Third Stage all the time. So is there a step-by-step process or methodology when it comes to software selection or figuring out how to choose the best option?
Absolutely. I mean, that is our bread and butter, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll break it down into 3 major steps, and I'm going to call them document, evaluate, and select. So what you want to do is document your current and future requirements and any major pain points that you have currently with the systems that you are using. Next, you would want to evaluate the technology solutions that are out there. create a short list of those vendors. You don't want to be looking at more than possibly 3 at this point. And what you will do is you will list all of your requirements, send that to them, and then evaluate their answers. From there, some of them will be invited to do demonstrations. Each vendor is then evaluated on how they can meet your requirements and your business needs. And finally, you will select the software that best meets those needs, as I just said. However, no system is ever going to meet them all. That 80-20 rule that we all talk about a lot really applies to this step in the process. A system that can meet 80% of your needs is a good system.
Excellent. I love how you broke that down into those 3 steps. That was a great way to kind of describe that entire process, as I know it can kind of be complicated at times for a lot of our clients and a lot of our community here that listens to our podcast. So we talk a lot about ERP full systems or an ERP suite versus best of breed or bolt-on type of options. So how do you know if you need a full ERP system or a more of a best of breed CRM, HCM type of option?
When evaluating an ERP, which is a very large system, what you want to do is select a handful of processes that are most important to your organization and evaluate those against your needs. You also want to document needs in other processes, such as maybe, let's say, human resources. And as you look at the system, see if there are some of those needs that can also be met through the ERP. If it's close enough, I would say possibly try using the ERP for that process. If it is very different, that's when you would want to then break out into a best of breed for that particular process.
So, Michelle, what are the role of the requirements that you mentioned earlier in the episode within the software selection process?
Sure. I mean, that is one of the most important things, I believe, in this whole process. And they're there to help you determine which system best meets your needs. You want to document mostly the needs that make you different from all other companies out there, or things that not all systems have. For example, let's talk about recruiting systems, just because that's where my experience is. Most of them will have at least one career portal. So you don't want that to be a requirement to have one career portal. Yeah. What makes you different could be that you need more than one portal. For example, one for professional staff, one for interns, one for internal staff. And you do not want to assume that all proposed solutions have that capability. So you would want to make that one of your requirements.
Excellent, Michelle. Thank you so much. That was great information. I know that competitive advantage that we talk about a lot too in that requirements building is so important. So we appreciate you taking us through that.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back to this conversation here in just a moment. You're listening to Kyler and Michelle talking about how to select the right enterprise technology for your organization. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Kyler, and Kyler's playing us a clip of a discussion she had with Michelle from our team talking about software evaluation selection. So let's jump back into the conversation.
We kind of talked about the selection process and finding the best digital technologies for your organization. But I'd really like to dig into what companies need to consider prior to that technology. So can you take us through some aspects that our listeners should be thinking about if they are considering a new technology?
Sure. I think the first thing is a clear understanding of where you are going in the future and how this technology will help you going forward. This is a strategic alignment that needs to happen at the executive level. The next thing would be to identify if you have the resources, the time, and the money to do the project. Let me give you an example. If implementing an ERP, the implementation process can take up to 10 months, and it will require your key and most experienced employees to be a part of it. They will need to dedicate between 50 to 75% of their time to the project, and you will most likely need to backfill those positions until the project is over. So the organization really must be ready to make those commitments to the project for it to be successful.
That makes a lot of sense. Definitely that commitment is a huge piece of that. So I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about vendors when we're talking about the software selection process, because obviously they play a huge role and have a big influence over the project. So what should their role look like in the decision-making process for selecting a new technology?
Sure, I would say that first and foremost, you want to look for vendors that are really interested in understanding your business requirements and will help you understand how their software will help you with that. But you also want to manage the software vendors a little bit. If you don't, they may end up showing you what they want to show you and not what you need to see. This is why we create scripts for the vendors that specifically guide them through a demonstration of the areas that are important to you. We aim to have the vendors not only show you that they do something, but also how they do something.
That's great. I know that's, a main role of our third stage stakeholders in that conversation or going through that process with our clients. So a lot of the team here talks a lot about analysis paralysis when it comes to software selection. Can you kind of take us through what that means exactly and how you might avoid it?
I think analysis paralysis comes when the people on the selection team are not confident in their knowledge of these systems, or various systems that they see all seem to do everything in your requirements list. So then it's hard to choose. I'll give you an example of one of my current clients. They decided to invite the top ERP systems to do a demo. They did not have requirements. They just let the vendors do the demo that they wanted. Once all those demos were over, they couldn't make a decision. Why? Because they didn't have anything to compare, apples to apples, oranges to apples. They just didn't have anything quantitative to look at to see who won, right? So they hired us to help them through a full-on selection process. We've taken them through creating requirements, sending out RFPs, getting demos, and they're almost ready to make a decision. Now, the other thing is that by hiring someone like us who has experience with the software, we're able to learn about the companies and also help them make this decision. Even through our process, you may find that two systems are good enough, right? They both meet that 80%, maybe in a little bit of a different way. At that point, I would say you might want to start looking at the vendor's culture, possibly the vendor support structure or their implementation methodology. And sometimes those things is what will differentiate one over the other.
Yeah, that's so important to that cultural fit. And speaking of culture, more from an internal lens, what are the role of maybe the executive leadership team in a software selection?
Well, every software selection project must have an executive sponsor. It needs an executive that strongly supports the project and helps the team communicate the importance of the project to the whole company. Without this buy-in from this executive sponsor, it will be very hard to get buy-in from the rest of the organization. When they see support coming from the top, employees are more likely to embrace the changes a new system will bring. The last thing that an executive can do is support the allocation of human resources to the project.
Excellent. I think that's so important to make sure that you do have not only the executive alignment right, but also the sponsor and the true leader of the project. So, in diving a little bit deeper into culture, what is the role of change management when it comes to this side of technology transformations?
Sure. I think change management is all about communicating to the organization. You want to communicate your plans to mitigate the concerns your employees will have when making such a change. You will want to make sure your employees are aware of the project, who will be involved, and how this might affect them and the organization. I'll give you an example for one of the companies that I'm working with right now. They're looking at an upgrade to their current system or a completely new ERP. So they have made sure to communicate to their IT team that were they to select a different ERP, those individuals will get training on the new software and that no positions will be eliminated. So that's going to prevent them from losing some of these team members if they hadn't been communicated to, because maybe they're out looking for a new job thinking they're going to lose their job. So all of this type of communication, training for your employees to help them use the software is really imperative, and that's what change management is.
Yeah, it sounds like that transparency from the top level down is really crucial to making sure your project is successful.
Right.
So thank you so much, Michelle. This was such a great conversation. We were so happy to have you today. Thank you for sharing all those great insights. If you had some recommendations for some additional resources for our listeners that might be interested in learning more about changing a digital transformation or digital technology, what would you recommend?
Sure. Well, we have the 2021 Digital Transformation Report out there. You can also visit our blog or watch our YouTube channel.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michelle. Another fun fact that I wanted to share with our community that is pretty unique about you is you help us a lot with our business in Latin America. You're actually from Costa Rica yourself, so I thought it might be fun if you said hi to some of our Spanish-speaking community.
Hola a todos en Latinoamérica. Muchas gracias por escuchar este podcast. Si tienen alguna pregunta, por favor, contáctenme y me encantaría ayudarles.
All right, good stuff. Thanks for that clip. We're going to come back and unpack some of the comments or topics we just discussed. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 51. Be sure to follow us on social media. You can track us down on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, just about every social media platform, and we post daily thought leadership and best practices related to digital transformation. It's all independent, technology agnostic, so be sure to check us out on social media. So, Kyler, you had that interesting conversation with Michelle. What are some of your takeaways or knee-jerk reactions to that conversation you had with her?
Yeah, always fun to catch up with Michelle. For our listeners, Michelle is hyper organized, so she keeps everybody kind of organized here at Third Stage and does a great job with that. And her talk about requirements kind of reminded me of that. So I wanted to ask you, I feel like requirements to me is still very confusing. So like lifting the veil on what that means for an organization. And she kind of talked about the importance of understanding what your business requirements are. So what if you have no idea what you have a future state, right? But you don't know so much of the requirements of the technology. Is that something that's similar to business process mapping, where you kind of start at the beginning and just, get everything out, kind of brain dump of what you want to be able to do, and then do the requirements then go to the vendor? Or how does that process work?
Well, I'd love to say there's some secret formula that only our team knows. That's not the case. It's more. It's not so much the approach, and it's more in the finesse or the art of doing requirements definition. And so, what I mean by that is, having the ability to do a few things is important in requirements definition. One is to ask the why. Why are you doing what you do? What's the intent? What are you really trying to accomplish? And looking past the what you do, because what you do is arguably broken. And if it wasn't broken, you probably wouldn't be looking at potential digital transformation initiatives like what you might be going through. So that's one, is understanding the why. What is it you're trying to accomplish? The how, the how is somewhat negotiable because a lot of the technology will drive that. The other aspect, or the other art component of requirements definition, is knowing how to prioritize, and knowing, there's certain requirements that are more important than others. So, in other words, not all business requirements and business processes and functions are created equally. There's some that are just going to be more important, or at least more important to your digital transformation and what you're trying to accomplish. There's also the need, or the benefit of looking at your business requirements through the lens of what your strategic goals and objectives are, to make sure you have that alignment. It's also understanding your customer and your stakeholders internally to figure out, how you can better enable some of those processes. So I think those are some of the biggest things I'd say. And then I guess the final component is also understanding where business requirements are. Certain business requirements might be important to you as an organization, but they might be a commodity to software providers. So in other words, certain processes and functions can be handled really well by most software systems out there, others can't be. So it's a matter of also understanding not just what's important to you or what your competitive advantages are, but also what are those big differentiators in the systems in the marketplace. And that's where the reason I call that the art of requirements definition, or the finesse behind it, because so much of that is based on experience. The process itself, doesn't look that different in terms of how you draw those out. Of course, facilitation is important, but the bigger factor is just more some of those nuances that I just described.
Absolutely. And in organizations, within that process of defining those strategic goals, these requirements are building that target operating model. Is that right?
It's part of the target operating model. The other parts of it are not just the requirements, which are these are the specifications of what technology should be able to do for us. A step above that would be the business processes, so the end-to-end processes, and then you'd have your business requirements that sort of fall below that, or the level below that. And then if you go up even a step above the end-to-end business processes, or actually not a step above necessarily, but more as part of the end-to-end business processes at that same level, would be getting into the organizational roles and responsibilities. Who does what are the different job designs of people that are touching the process. And then that also feeds into architecture and some of the technical requirements as well. So there's a lot of different layers and dimensions of it in there as well. But it is different. Business requirements are a subset of that future state operating model. Future state operating model is more comprehensive, looking at the process, the requirements, the organizational piece, technical, architecture, all that stuff.
Absolutely. And so Michelle has kind of an interesting role here at Third Stage. She's obviously one of our very talented senior managers, but she also handles all of our Latin American business because she is a Spanish speaker. She's from Colombia. And I wonder how that's like, as someone who doesn't speak Spanish, to sit through those workshops with her. Obviously, we have a translator, but it must be kind of an interesting process to help select a software for an organization in which you don't know the cultural nuances or the language. So I wondered if you would kind of provide your experience in working with those more global type of organizations.
Are you suggesting that I don't speak Spanish? No,
I guess I don't know. I've never heard you speak Spanish, but
no,
but maybe you
I do
do.
not speak Spanish. That is correct. I speak French. I took 2 years of French in high school, but
Oh, very good.
yeah, I'm a little rusty, just enough to have French-speaking people make fun of my accent and my futile attempts to speak fluent French. But what I'd say is, language is certainly important, and being able to speak a common language is important, which is why having people like Michelle that speak multiple languages or can help translate or speak more comfortably with something other than your native language is so important. But there's also the cultural piece too. So you want to bridge that gap with language, but you also want to bridge the gap with the culture too, and just understanding not just the geographic or the national culture, but also the culture of the organization you're working with, which might be quite a bit different than the geographic or the national culture you're dealing with. So I think all those, what you're bringing up is just more of a bigger need or a requirement for a effective digital transformation on a global scale, is just making sure that you bridge those gaps between language and culture and operational differences throughout the world and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. And if you are a Spanish speaker, I certainly encourage you to download our 2021 transformation report, which is in Spanish, that Michelle helped us put together. And then also Michelle has some Spanish videos on our YouTube channel too. So always a great to see that diversity on the team. But great interview. And I think software selection is really a good time to bring it up in the new year, as we're going back to basics and really kind of breaking down what businesses need in general to choose the right software for their business. And engaging a partner like Third Stage or Michelle is always a great first step, because it can do things of like lift the veil of requirements building and templates and deliverables and those types of things. So it was definitely very interesting and timely to hear from her today.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you certainly want someone that's independent and technology agnostic like Third Stage to help you with your digital strategy and roadmap, your software evaluation selection, but you also want someone that has that global perspective, that can understand different languages, different countries, different cultures, and has a team that can speak sort of a global language and interact globally. But even if you're not a global team or a global organization, or a multi-language organization, still having that global perspective can be extremely beneficial. So that's something to think about as you think about who can best help you through that process to help you define your strategy and roadmap for 2022 and beyond. So it's a really good point. Well, good. Well, thanks for all your help here today with this podcast. I want to thank everyone for joining here today. And just a reminder, you can catch new episodes every Wednesday. Be sure to subscribe and provide comments and feedback on this podcast and share it with your colleagues. We'd love to get the word out as much as possible. And be sure to follow us on social media. If you just can't wait for that next episode of Transformation Ground Control, follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, wherever you're on social media, Twitter, whatever it may be, and look for us there. And we put out daily thought leadership blogs, articles, videos, all that good stuff, so you can stay up to date on digital transformation trends and best practices in between episodes of this show. And you can also check out our sister podcast too, which is called Digital Stratosphere, and that's one that you host as well, Kyler. So I encourage everyone to check that out as well if you haven't already seen that one. So thanks very much for being here, everyone, today. Hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week on Transformation Ground Control.